I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's film block that we call Rough Drafts. Rough draft, a first version of something, such as a document that needs a lot of editing and rewriting. I found this definition online, and I feel as if it is in itself a rough draft. Rough drafts are invaluable in the creative process. They are the foundation of your vision and the best tool to convey a future project. Usually rough drafts come in the form of scripts. A first draft of a screenplay will be rewritten and rewritten and rewritten and ultimately finalized into a script worth shooting. Not so much the case with today's block, as each of these films represent a filmmaker's first attempt at bringing a story to life. A story that they would later get to remake, and that second version would become one of their finest and most widely recognized films. Today's Grindhouse Institute block includes 1934's The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1989's LA Takedown, and 1992's El Mariachi. While on a trip to Switzerland, Bob and Jill Lawrence, along with their daughter Betty, are wrapped up in a conspiracy to assassinate a European head of state. Jill is told of this conspiracy, and Betty is kidnapped by the conspirators, which leads the Lawrences on a rescue mission into a criminal underworld run by the sinister Abbott, played by Peter Lorre. A gang of professional criminals led by a dangerous man named Patrick McLaren becomes the primary target of Los Angeles robbery homicide Sergeant Vincent Hanna. An explosive game of cat and mouse escalates into some of the biggest shootouts to ever grace the made-for-TV screen until the two men are finally brought face-to-face in a final showdown. A young mariachi stumbles into a small Mexican town looking for work. With a little bit of money and his guitar case carrying his signature guitar, the mariachi finds some promise in a small bar run by a local woman named Domino. Simultaneously, a local criminal named Azul, recently freed from jail and also carrying a guitar case, this one filled with a small arsenal, is on the run from drug lord Moco. The mariachi and Azul are mistaken for one another again and again, forcing the mariachi to fight for his life. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
Keep your eyes fixed on this light. Keep them fixed. Before receiving the first degree of the sevenfold ray, your mind must be white and blank. You are already feeling sleepy. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Your mind is becoming quite blank.
Normally when you think about a remake is a different filmmaker. And why is that different? Because that's a reinterpretation of a story, right? Which is kind of a way filmmakers work, right? I mean, a director oftentimes is interpreting a script. A screenwriter might be interpreting a novel. What's really awesome about this is that it's not really a reinterpretation of your own work, but it's just building upon and kind of seeing what works, right? It's essentially, could you shoot more scenes? Could you swap out certain actors, recapture certain performances? So it's very, a very cool exercise, and it's great to be able to have that opportunity.
Buy you a cup of coffee.
Dinero, una cerveza. En botella, güey.
All right, and welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster. Thanks so much for coming back. We have a very special show. I'm with my friend here, Jeremy Floyd. How are you, man?
Good, doing well. How about yourself?
We also have a new friend here. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Good.
Didn't mean to step all over that. We also have a new friend here today. Jeremy, would you like to do the intro?
Yeah, wanted to, for this very special episode, bring on a very special friend, my creative partner, writing partner, and all-around good friend, Andy Buigues.
Thanks. Great to see you guys.
Welcome. Yes, and we have a very exciting show, as they are all getting so much more exciting every show that we do. Today, we are calling today's show Rough Drafts. I think that's the code name that we've been thinking of for this one.
Yeah.
And we've got a triple feature of movies that were in ways the first attempt at making these films from the filmmakers that made them, and they have also made remakes or different, better versions later on in their careers. So today we're going to be watching today we watched 3 films. The Man Who Knew Too Much, and what year was this?
1934.
So this is the original. We have talked about The Man Who Knew Too Much with Jimmy Stewart, but this is the 1934 version of The Man Who Knew Too Much. Mm-hmm. We have L.A. Takedown, Michael Mann's blueprint for Heat, which I can't wait to dive into this one. And then we've got El Mariachi, which is Robert Rodriguez's first film. I believe it's his first big film and put him on the map.
Yeah.
And this is what was the inner workings of what Desperado came to be. So about 3 years later, probably 4 years later, pretty soon after that. But so this was a really interesting exercise, in my opinion, going through these, especially watching The Man Who Knew Too Much, as we've talked about it and went in depth here. How these same directors could direct something similar with very similar scripts, but they could be so different depending on different circumstances, I would say. In Hitchcock's, for instance, he was probably just from early in his career. This is one of his first films, and like that was one of the things. But it was actually quite a good one.
This was Hitchcock's like 22nd film, but he was also. I mean, he was inventing cinema at the time, so give him a little slack.
Unbelievable. And, speaking of, that we've talked about the remake of this film, which was, again, done by Hitchcock as well, a lot of similar beats in this one. Not a whole lot different in terms of story, but it does have quite a different ending, which I think we even mentioned on a previous episode. But, so I'd love to, get your guys' thoughts on, why we picked these 3, just to give an overview of, like, why we did this episode.
I think this kind of started in episode 1 when we were talking about the Jimmy Stewart, Doris Day, Man Who Knew Too Much. You were surprised to hear that Hitchcock had remade his own film, and I was thinking, I wonder what else is. Oh yeah, L.A. Takedown was definitely still in that category, where it's like Michael Mann had this idea, then had to adapt it for a different medium, and then got a second bite at the apple a little later. And then, my initial thought was to go and do it. It would be slightly different, but it would be watching Westworld as a precursor to Jurassic Park, which, it's both from Michael Crichton, and you can see how Westworld was like a sort of a first draft for what became Jurassic Park. But then I was I was running this by Andy because we were chatting about L.A. Takedown, and he was getting excited about that one and watching it, and because he had never seen it. Actually, I had never seen it either. I had it for the longest time.
This was my first time too. Yeah, I was I was pretty excited. Yeah.
Yeah. So unless you watched it on its first airing in 1989. So
wait, was this on just television? Was this a made-for-television movie?
Yeah, made-for-TV movie, and then it came out in like Scandinavian VHS and then German DVD.
Sure.
And that was it. So it's like it's a pretty hard movie to find.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we were talking about L.A. Takedown, and we're getting kind of excited to kind of watch it and compare it to Heat. And then Andy had the suggestion of, well, maybe El Mariachi would be better than Westworld because it's the other 2 films are a director redoing their work as opposed to sort of a writer. Westworld was written and directed, but Jurassic Park obviously was not directed by
Who was
Crichton.
Who was Jurassic Park? Who directed that? Who's that small?
I'm forgetting his name right now. You probably never heard of him. It is in a way like you mentioned earlier, like a little bit of an odd man out. But I think it still fits because there's a lot of stuff
it fits perfectly
that works so well in in El Mariachi that then he kind of remade, beat for beat in Desperado. But sort of the idea was that in all of these movies, it was a director, taking one swipe at it and then having a chance to do it again. And in every case, I think it is when that director had matured or like gotten to a better level of the mastery of the craft and everything.
More money, too.
More money, better cast, and, all that kind of stuff. And all of the remakes that they did of their own work were the sort of famous version, and these were the less well-known versions.
Because I had never heard that the Man Who Knew Too Much was, an original film that was remade. Never knew that until we did that podcast.
Yeah.
LA Takedown, never heard of LA Takedown. I mean, I knew Michael Mann, and I knew who he was, obviously. I've seen Heat. I've never seen all of Heat. I'm gonna say that out loud, so we got to put that one on the list too. I know.
Oh man.
Are you sure you want to admit that? This is recording.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. No, I hit stop real quick.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I think that El Mariachi actually fits much better than I think is a great suggestion, mostly because watching all three of these films together, you saw those beat for beats that each of these directors took. And to see Robert Rodriguez go from literally it's just him holding the camera, right? Mm-hmm. Trying to do a lot of those like Sam Raimi type moves from Evil Dead. And there's a lot of really quick cuts. Obviously another film that wouldn't have made it without the edit. Obviously he's a master editor and he can just get in and out of these scenes really quick. And all those little humorous moments that he's got, the guy, lighting a bunch of matches off the face. He did that in Desperado as well in that dream sequence. And there was just a lot of cool stuff because this was the first time I saw El Mariachi too.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I've seen Desperado quite a few times. So seeing all those little moments,
I love that guy, the sort of little henchman who looks like the Mexican Saddam Hussein. He's always lighting the match off his cheek.
So funny, right? And he keeps like giving us a reaction. Some of it's off the back of his head. Some of the times it's off his cheek. It's like ridiculous.
It's like, oh man. Yeah, exactly.
But I thought Man Who Knew Too Much. Let's start with that. Yeah. Some of the beats that matched. Obviously, this couple is on a trip, a Swiss trip. In this one, instead of being a famous actress / singer, I would say that she's a skeet shooter.
Yeah.
A marksman, professional marksman.
A marksman, which, was a nice little throwback because she wasn't singing Que Sera Sera and finding her kid at the end. She was shooting, sniping the killer that was up on top of the building. I thought that was great. But instead of a son being taken, this time it was a daughter, right? There was some of those kinds of things. But I love, it's Peter Lorre. I just love the addition of him in this movie because he adds such a strange creep factor to any movie he's in. And you could tell why he was in so many of these at that time.
Yeah.
There. You see, at such a moment, your shot will not be heard. I think the composer would have appreciated that.
Yeah, and I love his, little Pepe the Pew, haircut with that little stripe down his head.
Yeah, when he took off his hat, it was kind of a reveal. I was like, whoa! Was that in at that time?
Yeah, he definitely brings a more menacing quality, and this is an interesting thing that stands out in comparison to the 56 version, where his counterpart in the 56 version doesn't kind of have that kind of menacing screen presence in a way. And even in the narrative himself, he ends up kind of, it turns out, working for someone else. But in this, Peter Lorre is kind of running this whole gang, and it gives their whole organization kind of a face of a menacing threat. And so I actually think that kind of works better in the original. In a way,
I do too. It's a little more focused.
Yeah, and the MacGuffin in this one, was a lot more focused on Europe had just suffered the trauma of World War I with that whole speech about a duke you've never heard of in a country or a city you've never heard of getting assassinated. All of a sudden, all these countries are at war, and they were sort of taking that idea and saying, okay, we're going to do this again. I wonder how much at that time in 34, the sort of march to war was sort of on the horizon. I mean, it seemed a little early, but I mean, perhaps it was in the air at that time. But anyway, that part of it, like giving the Peter Lorre crew, sort of a motivation for what they're doing, and like it's not just a total MacGuffin that you don't know anything about, like it was in the 56 version. That made the sort of the plot and the intricacies of what the bad guys were up to a little more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think what's kind of interesting there too is just that Hitchcock, it was kind of an original idea that he put together with a co-writer, and it was an amalgamation of kind of different real life stories. And it's interesting to see, what eventually became the 56 version is how he had this template that essentially is this great setup for a thriller that's a variation on kind of his wrong man motif, which is, this stranger, in this case, a traveler in a foreign land who befriends a political actor, in this case a spy, who has very important critical information, who he entrusts in him as he's murdered, and then the protagonist is kind of coerced into keeping his mouth shut by having his child kidnapped. So it was
same name too. They kept his name, right, out of like the same character name, Louis
Right.
Bernard.
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there were some of those, like you said, that template. There were some of those moments that he still just kind of fit in there because they worked. Why change it if they're going to work?
Right, and he was trying to adapt it and modernize it for that time period, and it works really well because, in a way, it's kind of a very universal setup, but it kind of creates this tension and kind of acts upon the fear that we could all relate to, which is a child being taken away from you, and you not being able to go to the authorities for fear of harm coming to that child. So it's kind of a really great choice for him to do as a remake. And of the three films that we're discussing today, I think this is more of the straightforward remake. It stands alone in the sense that it is by the same director, but it's really cool that he kind of chose this one to remake.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's never done that again, right? There's never been a remake of one of his own films. Is that correct? It's just surprising.
So.
I'm not surprising because of the story itself, but it is pretty interesting that he would choose this one in particular. It's still very successful, and there were some creepy moments in this one. It almost didn't play it as whimsical as the 56 version. However, I do feel that there were some amazing funny moments in it when he was singing, when they're singing with the church choir, telling the woman over there to the left. And there was some, like, you could tell the humor that he was injecting in some of his movies even back then. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and that actually made it over to the next one because it was such a great bit.
That woman at the end, half left to you and me.
Also, what was interesting about the 34 version is that the organization that Peter Lorre is running is a type of cult. I think it's the sun-worshipping cult.
The Tabernacle of the Sun.
Yeah.
They were literally sun worshippers.
Which is much closer to what we were talking about with the 56 version, where it's like they're playing that really creepy hymn that sounded like...
Yeah.
Like the...
It's almost like he pulled the rug out on that one and been like, remember this weird thing I put in this last movie?
Remember
I'm
we
not going
kind
to
of
do
did
that.
The Wicker Man? Well, that was more like this one, yeah.
We're going to go for it in this one, though.
But it stands out because in both movies, the kind of specifics of what the organization is trying to accomplish, who they're working for, are very ambiguous. In this case, it's not clear if Peter Lorre's cult, if that cult represents their ideology or if it's a front. Whereas in the 56 version, the church is their front, and they're working for some unnamed foreign government with an embassy in London. So it is interesting that perhaps to avoid kind of international political tensions, he kind of kept those details pretty ambiguous.
Right.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
That's true. And it was like in 56, it's if it's like, I don't know, Cold War tensions or something, it's maybe you don't want to like put the possibility of World War III in your light entertainment movie, like,
Yeah.
Somewhere a stand, just keep it somewhere a stand or some place a stand. Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about it a stand. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have to admit, this had one of the best chair fights I have ever seen in a movie.
Oh, I know.
Someone had to have gotten hurt during that.
I know. I was kind of sad that didn't get reprised in the 56 version because it was pretty intense, right?
Yeah, this ending was a little different. I mean, they obviously had the concert. They were trying to line up the gunshot with, the cymbal crash and everything. That was similar. But then we went to a whole nother scene after that concert, and it was like a suddenly shootout. It was like a Reservoir Dogs shootout all of a sudden. What the hell happened? Exciting, but it seemed like it was almost a prologue to what was in the remake of the film, and this was kind of like added content.
Yeah, it's funny about that shootout. Like, I mean, that was probably one of the more memorable pieces of it, especially in a movie of that time. Like, this is an early sound film, and you're seeing Windhouse break and all these other things, and like kind of hearing noises down the street, and it starts to become a little abstract. It does some of that pure cinema stuff that Hitchcock was so famous for. You'll see just a glass break and a window shatter, and you kind of don't even know where those are in space, and it's just kind of it was kind of a wild scene, and it was, I feel like especially for a film of that time, pretty sort of quickly cut together. You know what I mean? Like the
yes.
I'm sorry. Like it was fastly paced. Is what I meant to say. Quickly paced.
Not like White Zombie.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's like hold.
But there was a bit of that in this one too. I mean, the reaction of the Lawrences to their girl being taken was a little bit different than the reaction that was delivered in the remake.
Well, that's just the British stiff upper lip, like
She's just kind of
can't possibly show emotion. No, dear.
Very understated.
Pish posh. Yeah.
No, everything's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
They certainly went about their lives in London pretty casually.
Andy and I watched The Man Who Knew Too Much, the 34 version, a couple years ago, and right before we watched that, we watched M, which is I guess
Peter
maybe
Lorre,
3 years before that, and that was Peter Lorre, exactly, Fritz Lang.
Serial killing, child murderer.
Yeah, exactly. What was interesting is how, so in 31, that's a really early sound film, and you see some mature uses of sound in that. In M, it's like, it's an early sound film, and even though there are some innovative moments in that, you see them still have these long sequences of silence and what feels like a very silent era film. And in this one, even though it's sort of slower paced, and like the actors such as Louis Bernard, dying a little too casually or whatever,
right.
and how the parents just didn't seem to care that their daughter was kidnapped, and anyway, like certain like stiff moments like that. But the way that the movie moved, only 3 years later after M, it was a lot closer to what we recognize as how movies are put together now, which was a really interesting,
right?
Sort of contrast to what M was.
Plus, they used the same special effect 20 years prior, or 17 years prior, when the downhill skiing, they just used that rear projection, and right. In the remake, they just kind of were walking in Marrakesh with the rear projection,
right?
Kind of like making moves, like you're moving in front of it.
Right. Walking on a treadmill. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, innovative in many ways, and I think that you're right. I think that the editing showed where he was headed, and he was obvious. He had the idea of film and how you cut it together, like that idea way before anybody else, clearly, and it was evident in this one. I thought it was pretty good. Actually, of the three, I think it was probably the most polished of films.
Well, he had more practice.
Yeah, a little bit. I didn't realize 22 before these guys. So was this? Sorry to go on to LA Takedown, but was this Michael Mann's first film? Like first 90-minute piece?
No. In fact, Thief and Manhunter were before this.
Manhunter was before this. Okay.
Yeah, and he had done a couple TV movies as well as some TV shows. So at this,
I mean, he was Miami Vice, right?
Yes, although I don't know what his role was on that exactly. Like his show was more Crime Story. Miami Vice.
Got it.
He was an executive producer. He wrote an episode or two of that, but I feel like it seemed anyway that a lot of the creative direction kind of came from a different showrunner. But he was heavily involved with it in any case. But he had done a TV movie. Sort of the first movie he had done was The Jericho Mile, which is a TV movie, and then the movie he did was Thief, and then The Keep, which is
oh yeah, I have seen The Keep. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
You can't forget that one.
Let's please forget that one. And then Manhunter, and then this movie, LA Takedown.
So this was a made-for-TV movie that they ultimately cut into a 90-minute feature film that now you can find. I don't know how the hell you found it because I watched it on my computer.
Yeah, so it was originally made as a pilot, or like developed as a pilot, and then
it totally feels like
they didn't want to pick up the series, so they just kind of apparently reworked it as a made for TV movie, like just a standalone film, a TV after school special or whatever. In terms of where I got it, I have the Region 2 DVD that came out in Germany.
Perfect.
And then just was able to rip that and send it to you guys, because it's very hard to watch at Region 2 if you don't have the nerd players. All right, if the FBI is listening, I didn't rip it.
Yeah, no, yeah.
We just actually borrowed the Region 2 DVD.
Yeah, and the player.
Yeah. No, what's really cool about LA Takedown, and what's so exciting about this episode is just that LA Takedown, I think of the three, is actually more of the kind of literal rough draft, right? Because whereas The Man Who Knew Too Much, the 56 version, was more of a straightforward remake, and El Mariachi and Desperado are, Desperado is technically or maybe literally a sequel. LA Takedown is literally a rough draft for what became Heat, and
you feel Heat all the way through this, really.
Right.
I mean, there's line for line sometimes.
The hockey masks, like the suits, the guns that they were using, everything was kind of line for line. Yeah,
that's because Michael Mann had heard about the story of Neil McCauley from Chuck Adamson, who's one of the detective advisors that had worked with him, I think, on Thief and probably Crime Story. And so he had this idea of doing a story of this detective kind of obsessed with hunting down Neil McCauley, and even had I think like an 180-page script that was set in Chicago. And so for this series, he thought it would be a good idea to adapt it for the pilot of the show. And so, he actually had to cut it down significantly, almost by half, to kind of fit it in the 90-minute slot. And so you see a lot of certain storylines either cut out or, a lot of the kind of characters and relationships kind of truncated in the film. And, probably you could say that don't work as well, but it's very interesting to, like you said, to see a lot of the same scenes verbatim in a way that he actually got to test out. For example, shooting in LA, because I think the original idea was to shoot it in Chicago, but obviously in adapting this TV movie that was shot extremely quickly, I think it was maybe like 19 days or something like that, he got a sense of how LA could actually become a very, very strong character in the film, and
definitely
we definitely see that in Heat.
Yeah, and if they'd shot it in Chicago, they wouldn't have had a shootout scene right in front of my old cleaners. I used to live literally on Shearborn, which is the next street over from where that bank is, where that last score happens. And
Oh, really?
All the big shootout happens, which happens a little too fast with a bunch of civilians outside, I have to admit, in terms of realism. But but shit. I mean, let's talk about who's in this movie, first of all, real quick. What a cast. What a cast in this made-for-TV movie.
Yeah, it's wild. I was really surprised with some of the people popping up in small roles, and then some of the people popping up straight out of T2, and
she's not my mother, Todd. Yeah,
and also you forgot to say please.
Yeah. We got Todd from T2,
yeah,
who is the best,
and Ralph from Heat, he plays Ralph.
He's in Heat as well, right?
Yeah, he's the guy, banging Hannah's wife.
Do directors just know this guy and love this guy? I don't know this actor other than T2 and this movie so far.
He's the one who gets the speech. You get to ball my wife in this postmodern dead tech bullshit house, but you don't get to watch my television set.
Yeah, I think he may be one of the few people that has a cameo in the second one, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the guy from The Frighteners didn't make it? Or the guy from Predator that says, "Got time to duck"? That guy's not in it?
Wait,
who has a really cool haircut in this one.
Which one was Got Time to Duck in this one?
So he's one of the agents working with Vincent, or the main guy here. I don't know what his name was, but he gets shot. He does get killed in that shootout. Oh. He gets killed right in front of the car, and he goes down real quick.
Wow. Okay.
He and Michael Rooker are next to in the cars, and then Michael Rooker's in it too.
Yeah.
Like, come on, this is the greatest movie ever.
You also forgot the your favorite Daniel Baldwin, who was in Vampires.
Billy Baldwin.
Yeah.
No,
or
Daniel.
Daniel Baldwin.
Yeah, exactly. That's
right?
what I said.
Huh.
T2, the biker who meets with Patrick. Kari Haruyuki Tagawa, who's Shang Tsung in the Mortal Kombat movie. I mean, come on. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Shang Tsung played Henry Rollins' character.
Henry Rollins is in Heat? I need to see this movie, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you definitely have to see it.
I know. I'm admitting it on there.
This is. Actually, all right. We're pausing the podcast. You're gonna go watch Heat. We'll reconvene in 3 hours.
All right. I'll see you guys in a bit. I honestly, I enjoyed this movie for what it was. I thought it really felt like a TV movie. I texted Jeremy earlier today, and I was waiting for the porn part of the movie to start. Like, at some point, I knew someone was going to drop their zipper, and it was all over. But it never happened.
Are you saying the plot is ludicrous, and you can imagine where it goes from here?
Story is ludicrous. Lord, you can imagine where it goes from here.
He fixes the cable.
We were talking about this after having watched it. Is just that because it was so truncated and there just wasn't enough time for him to really, build out the story and create the atmosphere and really let the storylines develop. It's hard to understand what's going on. And if you haven't seen Heat, and maybe this is a good question, we had a sense that you might not know what was going on in LA Takedown.
Yeah. I had a hard time following. I really did. Like, I think that they skipped a lot. There, like you said, there wasn't much they didn't really explain why things were happening. I mean, it was fine. It was a crime movie. These guys were trying to score with bearer bonds at different banks, and okay, fine, that's cool.
Yeah.
But, get to the next one, and some of the police scenes were great. Like, I got that, but yeah, overall, I was like, was there more motive to this than just money? I guess it was just money for this guy, right? At least in this version.
That is the part that is so interesting. When you watch Heat, you have a better understanding of all that stuff, and I guess that at least in your case, it's right that, like, if you aren't familiar with Heat or don't remember Heat very well, and you just watch LA Takedown, the plot and what's happening and who's saying what and what that means to the next person is very hard to follow. Because they had to strip all the guts out of it. To try and cram it into 90 minutes or cram it into a 19-day schedule or whatever it was to get it made. But despite a lot of those limitations and perhaps some of the actors not bringing the same amount of heat as Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, let's say, I was actually pretty impressed with what they got away with the bank shootout.
Yeah,
definitely. I was blown away by that. That was like one of the coolest scenes. And again, that was like right by one of those scenes was right by my house. But yeah, the bank itself was.
Yeah. Well, wait till you see Heat.
Everybody stay cool. Do exactly as we say and you come away okay. We're not here to hurt anybody. We're here for the bank's money, not your money. Your money is protected by the federal government under the FDIC program. You are not going to lose a penny.
Well, that's great that makes sense, right? That he could do something like this on such a small scale. And if you give him, $50 million to work with, go blow it out.
Right. I think it seems like there was a lot of invested in that sequence, maybe to kind of showcase the production value of the TV show, but interestingly enough, it kind of, it just shows you that it lacks what really makes Heat such a great film, which is that it's not actually an action film or a heist film, but it's more about an exploration of these characters that are kind of two sides of the same coin, and kind of what the detectives have to go through to stop guys like these bank robbers that take down scores, and what the mentality and the lifestyle that these criminals have to lead in order to be very good at their jobs.
They kind of got into it, them having coffee was, they got into it a little, the troubled relationships that each of them have on their own, in parallel. I got all that, but
yeah.
I could see how, fleshing that out quite a bit more would, make a better presentation. Yeah. This was more just, all right, let's get to the next score and let's shoot more people.
Yeah.
And, come on, sport, let's go.
That's what separates Heat from being the sort of action porn, robbery porn of LA Takedown, where it's like it's not just the next excuse to have a robbery scene. Each piece is,
right.
is like building towards something, and like
how do we get to the next robbery?
Right. And if you enjoyed that coffee scene, now imagine that coffee scene
with
Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, and you could just imagine how it's taken to the next level, right?
I don't know. That sounds kind of shitty.
Yeah.
So you think
that
bit. Version's pretty boring, then, huh? Yeah. No, I don't think either of these, Vincent or Patrick were in this version were anywhere near what Pacino and De Niro can pull off. So again, I remember seeing parts of Heat, so I had the basis for what it was about. So I did kind of get this film, and I didn't. I looked at this more of, like you said, it was a heist and action porn, shootout porn. But El Mariachi, I thought, had a little bit more of a soul to it. And I think it's interesting that you call it somewhat of a sequel because, as you know, El Mariachi, spoiler alert, he gets shot in the hand at the end and can't really play the guitar anymore, or at least that's what we think. And in Desperado, the mariachi in that has his hands already destroyed and he can't play guitar anymore. So now that I'm thinking of that, I guess you're right. It is a direct sequel. But this is the first time I saw El Mariachi all the way through, and I was pretty blown away by what he did with very little.
Yeah.
And just a note on the sequel part is that originally Robert Rodriguez had the intention of doing a trilogy, and what's interesting is with El Mariachi, it's kind of like the origin of the character. And then that the scene, the climactic scene in El Mariachi is recreated at the beginning of Desperado to kind of bring that link. But the reason I think I think you could argue it also qualifies as a rough draft is just that unlike a sequel where you kind of expand on the world that was created in the first one, you kind of build up the plot and kind of move that along. A lot of the set pieces and situations were essentially just recreations of El Mariachi with a bigger budget.
Right.
More extras. Yeah, exactly. Better blood hits.
Yeah. So some wire work, pulling away with the guns, and it became just like the crank to the 11 version of El Mariachi, Desperado, in my opinion, especially the bar scene. It was great in El Mariachi, and he got away with a lot, Azul blew those guys away, but when he goes in and fucks that thing up in Desperado, it's one of the greatest scenes ever. Because isn't that, in Desperado, isn't that a story that Buscemi's telling? Or is that when he's really in there? Sorry, yeah, I was getting confused.
There's both, actually. Yeah, so
right, yeah, I didn't know which one you were referring to, but I know that there's a scene that, that's more of a dream sequence that is like completely out of hand because it's like Buscemi telling them about the giant Mexican that he saw that came into the bar.
Yeah, which is a brilliant scene because essentially you have a setup which sets him up as this larger-than-life figure, and then you actually see him come in and kind of work his violence, and it's even more impressive than the build-up. And so it's such a great way to introduce the character there. I mean, he's even more unstoppable than you saw in Steve Buscemi's when he was laying it down thick.
Yeah. And he plays the same name, right? It's just the El Mariachi is his name in Desperado as well.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's some loose ties. It's interesting because if you think about it, you can highlight a few things that are almost identical, right? You have the stranger comes into town. You have the bar sequence, the guitars. You have the mistaken identity of the assassin. You even have the love interest that's really kind of being maintained by the lool drug dealer, and you even have almost the same climax, even though it's more off screen in Desperado. But even watching it this time, there's some things that kind of stood out, which is the fact that they place some emphasis that presumably the drug dealer in El Mariachi, Moco, was working for Bucho, and that's why his obsession with Bucho being the last one, something that I had totally forgotten about until I watched it again. You forget about it because immediately after he gets shot, and you just kind of the whole time assume he's just hunting down all drug dealers. But there was definitely an intention of linking it, but you could definitely see that El Mariachi was kind of a rough draft for what kind of the ideal version of this story would be, right? And having more resources and a young filmmaker that was kind of refining his visual style kind of came together in this classic that, could arguably be, one of his best movies.
It's his Evil Dead 2 in many ways, and we just watched that for the last episode, and it's, Evil Dead 2.
That one came to mind too,
Right, because, that one calls itself a sequel. It gives itself a different, subtitle of, Dead by Dawn. But this one, are technically two different films, but this one feels like Desperado does feel like El Mariachi, but for the American audience with an American budget, and now Robert Rodriguez is over here, and this is clearly him trying to, damage his arm so he makes all this money doing medical tests or whatever so he can make money for more film and all this shit. I never got to read his book, but I've always wanted to read the book he wrote.
Rebel Without a Crew?
Rebel Without a Crew, yeah. It's supposed to be great. I don't know if you guys have check that out.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit of it for this. I had read it a long time ago and kind of skimmed through it again, and it's pretty, it's really interesting to see kind of the inception of it, and also all the people that were his collaborators early on and what that experience was like.
Right, and I think we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but some of the stuff where it kind of justifies it being a part of this thing is in Desperado, okay, the character in El Mariachi is now supposed to be played by Antonio Banderas, and we kind of see sort of the last 5 minutes of El Mariachi kind of condensed into 30 seconds in the opening of Desperado, but then kind of like Andy was saying, there are so many other beats where he just hits the exact same notes that it feels more like a first draft or a remake of itself.
Right.
And I guess maybe you wouldn't call it a remake exactly, but definitely a first draft, which is kind of what we're going for here. And it's funny because one of the best parts of El Mariachi was Azul, and
he's great.
This whole thing
and the music.
The score that opens it, you're like, oh wait a minute, the music sounded better than even the visuals you're looking at, and you're like, it was kind of discordant in a way. Almost all of the score was great in that. I mean, not just acceptable, but like actually pretty great.
I agree.
Yeah, and he really, I think, figured out with El Mariachi that you could use the music and the score to kind of create a setting and then also just give it energy and pace, to the point where in Desperado, I think there's probably a music cue, some great song accompanying almost every scene in the movie. Even the quieter romantic scenes and have some just really beautiful music.
In Desperado, you're talking about?
Yeah, in Desperado. I mean, it drives everything, and you could see that starting to take shape in El Mariachi, right? You have the great kind of song that he makes up on the fly to save his life, and then you have the kind of great ballad that he sings for his
that was a great scene,
love interest. But what's kind of cool about that too is that even that song, which I think he had recorded specifically for the movie, ends up becoming, I think, the underlying theme for the rest of the film. And so he just saw how well that could work to build, kind of create the ambiance of this setting, right?
Yeah, it was interesting, when we're talking about the first draft thing, like, we had one other thing to kind of, that was sort of rehashed in this one was that idea of like sort of the mistaken identity of the killer that comes to town. In El Mariachi, that's Azul versus the Mariachi, and in Desperado, that's sort of Navajas versus the Desperado.
Was that Danny Trejo?
Yeah.
The knives,
yeah.
The beginning of Machete.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, this was the beginning of. I mean, Danny Trejo had been in something like a dozen films at this point, but always as a really small part or this or that. So both Desperado and Heat were made in '95. They came out within months of each other, and Danny Trejo has breakout roles in both movies. So that was an interesting connection between these two remakes. And it's funny how that push kind of made Danny Trejo a star out of those two movies.
Yeah, it really cemented his image as this kind of character actor, kind of a hard-hitting badass assassin or a tough guy.
And I don't think he had a line in Desperado either. I think he was the silent person that would basically get his mission, find who he needed to kill, and then he went and screwed up that limo with throwing the knives down into the. Right. That's another great scene, But I like that was it wasn't the whole plot like it was of this. That was just that one scene. He was the mistaken man in black. In this one, that was kind of the entire impetus for this ebb and flow of. The El Mariachi's getting chased down by this guy. Right. Why? Because he thinks he's this other guy. And then, Azul's there. Let me see your case. Oh, there's just a guitar in there. Oh, it's this guy again. It's him. And it keeps going back and forth.
Yeah.
And it almost has this cartoony vibe to it.
Yeah.
And then, he again, we were talking about how Raimi did that. Raimi had a bit of a cartoony vibe, especially when he would do these quick moves and edits and push pullbacks and things like that. And it seems like Rodriguez is like a guy's just leaving a building, and instead of just shooting him leaving the building, he has to pull back all the way on the guy, give it all this energy. Everything's got all this, everything's pulling you through. And again, it's one of those moments where you see where this guy's he understands film, he understands pacing, he understands how to bring you through this action, even though there's not a whole lot on screen,
right?
Production wise,
even during a scene where the guns aren't going off. He's finding ways to keep you engaged, sort of visually.
Yes.
What was interesting about El Mariachi being a first draft is that in El Mariachi, the mariachi character was definitely a very passive character. Things were just happening to him throughout the thing.
Right.
He was mistaken identity. In a way, there's a little Hitchcockian there because that often happens in Hitchcock land. But how much more interesting was it in Desperado when he became an active character, right? He was actively pursuing something. He was actively had goals in mind and was trying to do something. And that has this. Maturing or that first draft to second draft type of thing, where you improve, by taking a second whack at it. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, in that case, I think this is more of Asul's story, right? When it comes to that,
Yeah.
He's, he got taken out of prison or out of his little jail cell there, and then he was on the run to find what he needed to find, which was.
I think that was more of an office, a rental office.
Yeah.
There. He just walked out.
Rental office with just some bars.
It was his WeWork. He just showed up and.
It felt like he was just kind of hanging out in there. It didn't feel like he was like imprisoned by any means. He just dropped the cash on the table.
Yeah. Well, he had to pay the WeWork rent on the way out the door. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but what's interesting about you were saying, Jeremy, is that you could really see Rodriguez's kind of growth as a storyteller there, because what he did essentially is an amalgamation of both the El Mariachi and the Azul character in Desperado. I mean, it's a little bit of the argument towards a sequel and what you would do, right? Which is essentially El Mariachi kind of becomes the guy who was mistaken for in the first one. But it's also in a way a cannibalization of those two types of characters. But it almost shows you that you kind of had to go through that process of seeing the character be passive to realize that it's much more effective to see him, take charge and try to kind of shoot his way out of town.
Because he never becomes that person until, Domino is killed. He basically takes out Moko. His gang leaves Moko, and then he's on the bike.
Yeah.
And he's still got his turtle next to him and his guitar. Or didn't he have something else with him? And but I mean, that was the only time that we see him become who Antonio Banderas is in as the El Mariachi.
Right.
Yeah.
All it took was him running on the hood of that car and having those two guys shoot each other on the way by to fully embrace the Desperado character.
And how Terminator 1 was that ending? It's like it had that same kind of like feeling, like down that desert road.
It felt like Terminator.
That's what I thought as well. Who knows what the future will hold for?
Yeah, it was the long desert road.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was like exactly the same thing. A storm is coming.
Exactly. You were just waiting for someone to take his picture there. And,
nice hustle, kid. But in terms of that active versus passive character, I think, tying it back into Hitchcock real quick, that the 34 version, the Leslie Banks character, who would later be played by Jimmy Stewart, was sort of tied up in the third act the whole time. And that was something sort of explicitly that Hitchcock wanted to avoid, was having, he wanted to have Jimmy Stewart be an active part of this, not just having to wait around smoking with Peter Lorre in an attic or whatever. Which as we saw in the '56 version of Man Who Knew Too Much, worked so much better when the parents were actively participating and hunting down and following leads and making moves and trying to outsmart and. It not just the fact that it's, in color and Doris Day kind of stole the show and then the parents were more emotional, but also just that the characters themselves were wanting it and participating in the movie that was happening around them.
Yeah. And what that just highlights is the fact that something that stands out about all three of these kind of rough drafts and their subsequent remakes is that the second films ended up becoming really iconic, and there's a sense that the filmmakers really did use this very rare opportunity, which was to get to make a feature-length rough draft of your film, and then take it, learn from that, and see kind of what were the strengths that could make your film more effective with audiences, and it really paid off.
Yeah, in fact, that idea about audiences, Hitchcock talked about in interviews how that was specifically what he had in mind, was that he had sort of a famous quote that he laid out to Truffaut, which was that he was what was it? It was in the 34 Hitchcock he was a talented amateur, and in the 56 he was a professional, and he went on to sort of elaborate on that by saying that it wasn't so much like that quip, but rather that in the 34 version he wasn't as conscious of the audience, and in the 56 version that was something he was very conscious of. And it definitely shows on screen the difference between the two.
Right, and it's just a kind of like you said a narrative change to make the protagonist an active character at the end, draw out the kind of Albert Hall sequence, and then kind of introduce this really cool plan at the beginning with Doris Day singing the song, which pays off at the end. Both kind of making the movie culturally very relevant, but also just really highlighting kind of Doris Day's beautiful voice and kind of her screen presence when she does get to sing.
And her very naturalistic acting skills, which
that definitely
always surprising.
Yeah.
Very, very real, yeah. Not like this one, though. This one we had those same faint moments and those...
Hand to the forehead,
exactly.
Fists on the hips.
To see how things have changed.
Oh, dearie me, I've just been shot and I must die now.
Yeah, very, very understated, right?
The idea of the mom in the early version being the sort of like Olympic marksman or whatever, and then having her snipe that guy off the roof, which is also her rival in that Olympic tournament.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That
the
was
other
it was pretty cool. The structure of the other one just worked so much better that it was worth sacrificing that aspect of the character to get them to be more active.
If we look at, for example, in LA Takedown versus Heat, I think Michael Mann there realized that it was important to feature a lot more of the supporting cast and really give us a perspective of their stories, of their lives, because ultimately it was about kind of building the world and the atmosphere of the film. And what's notable about LA Takedown is that that's very obviously missing, right? I mean, it's a 4-man crew. One of them you barely know anything about, which is the Chris character, and the character that Danny Trejo plays in Heat and LA Takedown is not even introduced until the third act, and even then, I think you don't even see a close up until he's dying.
He kind of appears out of nowhere. Yeah, exactly. So
you could really tell that and obviously he probably knew that from the get go when he had this vision of what his version of this, his ideal version of what the story would be. But it is very cool to kind of try something, see it not work, and kind of validate what I'm sure were more of his natural instincts once he had the kind of cachet and track record to get the resources he needed to make the movie.
But like you said, this is a very rare opportunity that not a whole lot of filmmakers get a chance to do the same thing again.
Well, I was telling Jeremy, I think one of the reasons he renamed Macaulay's character to Patrick McLaren is because I think he was saving the Neil McCauley story for when he had a chance to do his Chicago version of this movie. And when he kind of decided upon doing this project and continuing to set it in LA, he's like, okay, I'm comfortable to give Macaulay his proper name when I know I'm going to be proud of the way the movie comes out.
So, because this one was McLaren, right? Patrick McLaren,
right.
And then in Heat, it's Macaulay. They actually use the real name of
the guy. Yeah,
whereas Vincent Han is a fictional name, so that one didn't matter as much. That's my assumption, but
well, and it's funny we were talking about this the LA Takedown after watching it, and the crazy part is not only did he get a second chance to do this movie, but he wanted a second chance to do it, because it's the end product of this one doesn't come off as great as maybe you had imagined it on the page. A lot of the dialogue didn't come to life the way one would want it to, and
the breakfast take me out to breakfast line didn't work at either the beginning or the end. It wasn't even a good button at the end. It didn't land.
It's interesting. That came up in a conversation we have with some buddies too, is that as iconic as the dialogue is in Heat, it's interesting that you forget that it's such great actors delivering it that perhaps it and LA Takedown I think exhibits that even in that diner sequence, a lot of the lines and I have to say even the dialogue in the diner sequence, it's different in LA Takedown, a little different, but it's very similar. It's still pretty good. It's just that, it's different when you have Pacino and De Niro delivering that dialogue.
When you have somebody like some of the best actors in the world or whatever.
Exactly.
To bring it to life.
The nuances of it, right? So you definitely see. I would imagine you would definitely want a second chance at that one.
Yeah, but I could also see in it being pretty crushing. You get it, and everything was falling flat, and perhaps that some of the reasons for that was like, okay, we only had 10 days to prep it and 19 days to shoot it, and didn't get the casting we wanted, didn't get this and that. But I could also see it being very deflating, where it's like, geez, maybe this wasn't as strong as I had imagined it or whatever.
But the flip side of that coin is it's going to be the most gratifying thing in the world
to do it,
really hit it out of the park with heat.
And these are 3 examples of them hitting it out of the park the second time around. I mean, they learned a lot, clearly.
Right.
I mean, I think Desperado is a far superior film to El Mariachi, and I think it's exactly that movie, but, times 20. Man Who Knew Too Much, I thought was a much better film, and now I need to go watch Heat.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say The Man Who Knew Too Much, the 56 version, I had recently seen it for the first time, and I was actually pretty blown away. I was telling Jeremy, I actually think it's one of my favorite Hitchcock movies, in part because it also very kind of uncharacteristically has very natural performances from both Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day that really kind of, really moved you.
It's her movie, I think. It feels like she's just stealing that entire movie from every other actor.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wonder there too if, I was asking Jeremy, and I don't know if The Man Who Knew Too Much, how much of that, the 34 version, how much of that was shot on location. But I feel like in the 56 version, there was quite a bit shot on location. And I feel like that may have contributed to more of those natural performances, whether it's, kind of some of the restraints of what you could do with the camera and the coverage. But it really lent itself to this like really great setup because you're kind of sucked into it emotionally the way you are kind of more contemporary cinematic experience.
Yeah, I mean, I, that's part of it, but I don't know. It's like moving away from that very unnatural way of speaking and reacting, especially Doris Day pulling out all the stops in the scene where she's told that her son's been kidnapped. And like, it's hard to, kind of like comparing Heat to LA Takedown. It's kind of hard to compare the two on that level. And it's that acting style was just starting to creep in and shift. I mean, like when was On the Waterfront? Was that also 56? Yeah, 54. Okay, so that had so that was just right around the same time that we're starting to get that more naturalistic, Marlon Brando like way of acting. So yeah, comparing it to a movie that was one of the first talkies or whatever, it's perhaps not that fair.
That's true.
But the idea is that how important the casting is to everything, obviously.
Yes.
And then how important it is to like have that second, more refined draft of your script that turns this good sort of skeleton of ideas or like these moments that come together into something that's a lot more fleshed out and more satisfying as a whole.
Yeah, and it's a little different too than the short, right? The more typical scenario is you do your short as kind of as a concept for a feature, right? But what's different here is that in a short you can't really see these kind of big picture conceptual elements to test how they work. It's kind of like it's more of the way you approach screenwriting than anything, right? You can test things out, you can think about structure, you can rearrange things, but when it comes to kind of fully executing in a 90-minute feature, it's very, very rare, and it's probably one of the main reasons why the kind of revisiting of these stories ended up being so successful.
Very interesting. Yeah, so I think that we should probably wrap this up unless anything needs to be said about any of these films.
Yeah, no, I think we covered it, but it's definitely, I don't think I'd sit down and watch LA Takedown again, but the other two I could perhaps watch, but it was definitely a fun academic experiment
Absolutely
to see what the less famous first try versus the more famous and more iconic second try.
Yeah, and I thought that especially leading from our Evil Dead 2 discussion into these movies, it all kind of worked together. These being versions created by the same director, twice over, and with the improvements that they make and the maturity in their craft that they find just through time of making movies. I mean, that's really all it is. Although El Mariachi did come out pretty soon. I'm sorry, Desperado came out pretty soon after El Mariachi, right? I think Rodriguez was one of those types that could just kind of jump in, and if he was given some time and money, he could really kick ass.
Well, I guess that's the other thing that makes sets El Mariachi aside a little bit, is that by the time Michael Mann and Alfred Hitchcock had remade their movies, they had already had a lot more experience under their belt. Robert Rodriguez went from making essentially a home movie to making a TV movie with Salma Hayek, and then making Desperado. So it's pretty wild.
It is wild to see that. But it was like you said, a great learning experience looking through all these. So to recap, we watched The Man Who Knew Too Much, LA Takedown, and El Mariachi. First drafts of what became better films, bigger films from the same director. Thanks so much for listening. Next week, we'll be looking at British gangster films. We are going to be taking a look at Get Carter, The Long Good Friday, and Sexy Beast. Why these films, Jeremy?
Yeah, I thought the Sylvester Stallone Get Carter would be good to watch along with The Long Good Friday. We always talked about having the odd man out, and the Long Good Friday, Get Carter were both made in the 70s, even though Long Good Friday had some trouble releasing and was finally released in the 80s. But Sexy Beast, our odd man out, actually has some connections to the other movies that may not be as obvious from the poster or from seeing the trailers. But in diving into it, I think we'll find some fun connections there.
Sounds great. That will be next week's show. So make sure you follow us on... Here we go. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, just Facebook. Check out Grindhouse Institute. Basically everywhere, and you'll find us. Make sure you listen, make sure you share, make sure you like. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
Ciao.
Your breakfast?